Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new episode of UX Banter Podcast. This podcast is presented by Galaxy UX Studio and powered by Galaxy Weblinks. Hello, everyone. Our guest of today's episode is one who has worked with some of the world's most beloved brands and has experience in top level automotive, IT, enterprise, web, and banking industries, including over 10 years of UX design experience. Joining us from San Francisco Bay Area, please welcome the Senior Product Designer at Deloitte, Mr. Jawid Elyacy.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And thank you for joining us, Javed. This is very early for you, and you had to, wake up way too sooner for this conversation. So, the question that we were, talking before we started this recording, I mean, that this is the first generation who is now dealing with UX on a senior level. Now, people are starting out in UX directly. So, what is your story has been of becoming a creative professional?
Yeah, well, I started really studying this human factors or HCI, human computer interaction, in school. So I went to San Jose State University in San Jose, California. So I was an undergraduate at the time, studying psychology. And then I learned about, as I was nearing graduation, I learned about the human factors master's program. So I knew some of the professors, so I kind of talked to them, and there was some similarity between human factors and psychology. So I was able to kind of get an entry into this program since I knew some of the professors, and I joined the program, and from there, I think the program was really geared towards practitioners. So a lot of the professors were practitioners in the field. So it made it, very valuable for somebody to go out there and start working rather than kind of teaching or doing other things. So that's how I started. Entry into the field wasn't necessarily through other means, like, started out as a different career path and then kind of got into this field. I kind of studied it or kind of learned it in school, so kind of had training in it. And then I got into my first position was an internship, the user researcher, they called it. So, I started on the research side, which is doing a lot of the understanding of the human characteristics of how they operate an application, and then, what can we learn from the data, like, how can we better the design based on the interactions and based on the behaviors that we witness from our participants, from our customers and users. So that's how I started from going through the research route, and then I found that I think I really like doing design more, so more like interaction design. So I kind of got into doing the design work, because it was more of an easier shift into research into design because I had studied it in school. I worked in a company that, really supported people. Like if they wanted to go in that direction, it's not a big shift. So I went into the interaction design field. And then, as I got more experience, I worked in different industries. I, started out in the high tech industry, and then I moved over to like finance industry, working for banks. I worked for automotive industry. Just had a lot of diverse experience with various industries throughout my experience, throughout the years. So, and then as time went by, nowadays it's kind of the UX has morphed into more being a hybrid designer. So you're not just someone who just did interaction design or like wireframes or user journeys, things like that. You're more of somebody who does the kind of the whole package, the kind of the end-to-end experience. You develop the wireframes and the final mock-up, because some of the technologies we have now, like design systems, and some of the tools, it makes it easier just to create high fidelity designs. So
Sure.
So that's
Also,
what I'm
the
doing right now. Yeah.
necessity of understanding the business comes to play as well. I mean, we are at the forerunners of gathering and understanding that what is actually needed. The defining the problem basically gives us
Yes.
the skill of a business analyst that one has to carry along with that. So big brand names. I mean, U.S. Bank, Bank of America, Cognizant, Mercedes, and now Deloitte. I mean, there are several brand names and big companies that you work for with different domains. So, what have been your key learnings from different industries?
Yeah, I think each one has kind of certain ramp up time that you learn the domain you have to understand. I think each industry has their own like a compliance and sort of niche area that you need to abide by, sort of like in the banks, we work a lot with, accessibility is a big
Mhm.
component because we work with the
Sure.
government, the US government. So you follow the accessibility guidelines very, you know, you focus on
Religiously.
it greatly in your designs. It's kind of very present in everything you do. Whereas in other industries, since they don't work with accessibility. It's not to say they don't value it, but it's not something that they focus a lot on, and they spend more time on the discovery session, and the research phase rather than once you get into the designs. Whereas I found that some places like banks and maybe other large companies, they have established methodologies where and there isn't a lot of room to kind of wiggle. You kind of follow the path they set. So if you like working in that area, like just following a kind of a cookie cutter approach, but you do have some freedom to kind of think outside the box. But for the most part, it's sort of limited by, like I said, compliance and maybe other constraints that you have to follow, business and technical.
I completely understand. I mean, I can recall that back in, I think, 2014 and 15, I worked for Santander in Milton Keynes in UK. And the way Santander has grown is that they acquire small societies and smaller banks just to open the branches and increase in the size. So every bank that they acquire or every saving society that they put into their fold comes with their own set of database, and there are services which are already written. The database tables might be different. So when we were working on the mobile apps, so you need to actually consider the different ecosystems where the data was already held. So any solution that was being proposed, it has to go through a workshop that what is feasible. So there are technical people who would come in and tell us that something is not right. Legal people would be there just to say that what we can actually say and what we can't do it. So in all, the user experience design was quite an iterative exercise where a lot of stakeholders were coming in and telling us about things that what can be done and what is absolutely a no.
Right.
So I completely agree with that there are certain restrictions. I mean, Staples is another example that I can give you where we have to do absolutely 100% aligned with the accessibility side of things. So yeah, different horses for the causes, right? Whatever your industry is, whatever domain that you're working for, their process has to be followed. Not 100% can be similar. You work for Citrix, I guess, or Cisco. Cisco was, I believe, you
Cisco,
work for
yes.
Cisco. Yeah. How was that experience? I mean, in telecom.
Yeah, I worked for different times at Cisco, and each group was slightly different. I worked recently. I had worked for their tools team, which is services and tools team. So in that sense, I got to work with some of the products. So in telecom, and I think it was a great learning experience because I think that team was really focused on that we don't get the requirements from the stakeholders, but rather than it's kind of like organically developed through research. So once you identify a problem, maybe user issue or something like that, then you build up upon that. You kind of use that as a requirement, and build a project around that. Try to fix
Mhm.
that. So it wasn't like the requirements came straight from the product manager or the business team, and then you just basically worked on that. It was a kind of unique experience, and so and then but at the same time, they there was a lot of we worked a lot with stakeholders and some of the technology they use. So you had to kind of really ramp up and learn the new technology. Like they use Angular JS a lot for the development of the application, the tool that I was working on, and so it made the UX process a little bit constrained, and we really had a lot of back and forth with the development team because they wanted to follow this this tool, this package that was already had kind of all the interactions already set basically, and so they said it's easier to follow that
The
way
design
rather
system was already
than,
developed and in play. So isn't that the restriction that would follow every time that we are working with anything which is enterprise UX, for example? I mean, you work for Cognizant, now you are at Deloitte. So when we are dealing with anything that comes from the enterprise level of user experience design, I mean, these are the handicaps that we have to follow through, right?
yeah.
What do you feel about it?
I think from UX standpoint, you should always speak up and champion the cause of the UX. If you feel like a particular flow or something is lacking from a UX standpoint or doesn't understand and take into account the customer's behaviors, and it's going to be a bad experience for them. You have to really speak up and let them know. I think in the case of Cisco, I think they want to use the Angular JS tool that already had, it made the development easier because they just said, we'll just implement this. We don't have to customize anything and we go from there. So it made their job easier, the developers. But in a sense, it wasn't a great user experience because we did user research on the prototypes, and we found that we need to customize the flow, the interactions, because customers told us that our user research told us to do this. So you have to really champion and speak up because at the end, if you don't follow through with your inclinations and what you feel, that the end product might suffer. I understand there are business and technical considerations that you have to follow. I mean, working with stakeholders is a critical part of my work, our work. So
and that is our job, isn't it, to become the advocate for the user advocacy is the part of the job, and if we are not doing it, then we are actually missing out on what we are hired to do. And that's true. I think that is that factor, I mean, bringing first finding the seat at the table and then making sure the user has the seat at the table in stakeholders, and the decisions are not just some decided in a boardroom meeting by the vote, but it has to be presented with the evidence that what works in the favor.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so with that, let's move on to my cards. So I have UX Banter rapid fire cards with me, and I'm going to shuffle these so that I'm not sure that in which order these questions are going to come from. And don't worry, they are not going to be too controversial. Okay, so my first question to you is that if there is one person, alive or dead, would you like to grab a drink with?
There's probably tons of people that are inspiring, and I look up to. I think you look at their life history and you can't help but be inspired. I mean, there's a lot of people like that. I think there's so many. I think thinking about it, I was recently watching a documentary about. I think one person who comes to mind is the John F. Kennedy. I think the president. I don't know if you're aware. People knew
No, of course,
about
yes.
him. And I think the 1961 to 1963, he was the president of the United States. His career was very interesting. I think he was in World War II, and I think he had a lot. He became president. He was his family had a very big name in the U.S. politics. So I would like to kind of talk to him and just understand what was
he
some of
was
the
one of the
pressures.
greatest, wasn't he? I mean, John F. Kennedy,
Yeah,
he was the one who said that by the end of the decade, we want to put a man on the moon. And that was his mission, to empower the science behind, everything that was happening with NASA. And he
exactly.
ensured that humans go to the moon.
Exactly. Yeah, I think he's the one who started that um, kind of the push to like really get somebody to go on the moon, and he helped a lot of like my family is like an immigrant, so he helped a lot of pave the way for immigrants to come to the U.S. Opened the way. I mean, I think he opened Peace Corps, a lot of great. Community and international organizations that are
True.
still available today. I think Special Olympics, these were started around his time. So all of these things were really important, and they're still here. So that's I mean his
True.
although his presidency was very short lived, he had like
Sadly.
a great impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. So next one is your favorite mobile phone app.
I like I think Instagram. I like it just because of the fact that it's so engaging. Just how easy it is to get hooked on it and just get information available to you. It's obviously they use AI and machine learning model to kind of give you content that's based on your interests. So they it's more it's I think the fact that it's kind of engaging, and it's just it's a way to share with your family and friends and loved ones. So yeah,
True. I mean, this is the second time that the content augmentation with the application comes to. So
yeah,
we were talking to other guests previously, and the app suggestion that came, somebody said TikTok, and they said uh, the if you are following a certain type of video, you are going to get those type of videos. If you are following trash, you are going to get trash.
yeah,
um, so my TikTok would look completely different from yours, and same is the case with Instagram. Other winning entries in that list are Uber Notes app and Calendar app. So I believe that actually sums up. So Instagram's entry into Hall of Fame. There we are.
yeah,
Okay. So next one. If you were a superhero, what would your power be?
yeah. I think it's a interesting question. I'm not gonna say something like oh, flight or super strength. And I don't think that's necessarily that's a very basic answer. A lot of people would wish that. I think uh, probably just the ability. I'm trying to think. Maybe something cool. Maybe sometimes uh, the ability to hear to hear well. Just sometimes you can listen to other people conversation. Maybe it kind of gives you a new perspective too. Like listening to what people are saying, thinking. Their dreams, wants, goals. So
So
yeah, it's kind of
basically,
have
empathy. Empathy
yeah,
is
empathy.
the core of it. I think that is what we do, right? As a professional UXers, that is the first thing that comes to mind, that you need to build empathy if you want to become great at your profession. And I think that is a very nice answer, to go with. Your favorite TV show of all time. What is it that you want to watch on a binge?
Uh, I don't watch that much TV. I just don't have time really. But I like Seinfeld. I mean, the show
Uh-huh.
Seinfeld.
That was
It was
funny.
very engaging. I used to watch it, but I don't watch that much TV. I usually sometimes watch something on Netflix or HBO Max or something like that, or Disney Plus. They have really good shows nowadays, just really engaging, for all action. I like the Squid Game show on Netflix.
Yeah, it was
It's
good,
a
wasn't it?
recent favorite. It's
Yeah.
very well thought out. It's a little bit. Sometimes it's a lot of action and violence, but it's a pretty good show. Very engaging. So I like that recently. I think some of just shows like that, like similar to Squid Game. I think that was a really good show. So
Quite different.
I would say that's quite different. I
Okay.
really like that. Yeah.
And next question is your favorite holiday destination?
I like to visit maybe around some of the islands in Turkey. That would be a great place, or just like to go to in that area, Istanbul, just a large city. So um, great history, food, culture. It's the weather is really nice. Mediterranean climate.
It is, yeah.
So I think that would be uh, a good destination. I think it's family friendly. I know like Dubai also is a great place. So
That's too
I
hot. I think Turkey would be the best place to be for
yeah
the holidays. Dubai sometimes if you can go there in December for a week maybe, that's nicer. But yeah, I
yeah
completely agree. Been to Turkey and I really love it is hot but not like super boiling hot like
yeah.
it is here. It's fantastic place. So the final question: one book that has big influence on you and you would like to recommend.
I think one of the books I read by Al Franken. I don't remember the name exactly. He's um, I think he was a U.S. senator from Minnesota. I think he was his story kind of gave I think he was sort of like an autobiography that he wrote about
Mhm.
himself. It's like about a Jewish kid growing up in New York, and then he went into television and comedy. That's where he was known, doing. He was on like Saturday Night Live, and then he took a turn into politics, and then he ran for U.S. Senate. I think he didn't even go for the lower positions. He just went for ran for the U.S. Senate. I think back in the early 2000, and he won. He won that seat. So, but it kind of shows his story from childhood up to the point that where he was as a U.S. senator, and it's very when his policies, you people out was very people centric, caring about the people's needs. I think he wasn't impacted by a lot of the these organizations, these corporations, these lobbyists that will try to get the senators to vote in their way or be influenced. He was very independent in that sense. So I think I liked his story. I think I like reading those nonfiction autobiographies. They kind of tell a good story. I'm sure there's a lot of other books
They do
that tell an
inspire. I mean,
experience.
people have to
Uh,
take charge of their lives and actually move on. And I
yeah.
think that's so. Talking about inspiration, can I ask you, where do you get your creative inspiration from? What is your process?
Um, I think, starting out early, in my career, I didn't know, like the path, like basically how to create designs. Like I made a lot of mistakes, and I think I spent a lot of time early in my career to rectify those mistakes. I think it's a design is a very it's not a easy to learn field, because it's not like engineering or civil engineering where you can read a book and like become proficient at it. You follow A, B, C, D. It's a very learned field. You kind of learn from experience, and you could make mistakes. And so design is very some design for some people. You show it to them, they love it. Other people will find it disgusting. They'll be really they might not like it. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. But you gain it from experience, I think. So I think my inspiration has been just to be persistent in my work, talk to the right people. I always just look at other peers. I think that the people I've worked with, they've been my inspiration, like seeing how they do their work, and look at get some ideas from them, their approach to design, because that's really key. The design is like really in the approach in the early stage to get it right. And then the actual design is easy. The actual like creating it in whatever tool you use to, the buttons and the colors. It's the planning and the research part and the user discovery phase is the really important, critical part. So
That is the challenge.
is the challenge. Yeah. So, I mean, I think when people who go into this field, you just have to be mindful that try to understand that it's a process. You have to like design the process. You really have to do the user discovery sessions, some early research to understand how this design will look like. What's the overall user journey? So maybe doing some journey mapping. Try to understand if you have any questions about the technology. Jot them down. Ask the people. So a lot of the work is like leveraging other people's expertise. Going to the engineers, going to the product team, asking them questions, trying to clarify and understand any confusion or any questions you have, and then from there starting to work on the design. So it's not always create something and then worry about updating it later. It's like really doing the upfront work before you start creating the designs.
The iterative process, the engaging process, the evidence-based design, making sure that all the stakeholders are heard, not just in the boardroom, but the users, the actual users, and the people who are dealing with the technology, so that if there are any handicaps, they are rectified right at the beginning.
Exactly.
Otherwise, you are going to get stuck into the loop. And I think one of the best thing that you said today was it's okay to make mistakes, because you will make mistakes when you are designing something. So,
Yeah.
Javid, that was quite wonderful to hear your story. And I believe that anybody who is listening to this podcast will realize that the paths are different, even the different domains people can come from, and you can jump from a different domain, or industries might change, but the users always are going to be in the middle. And that is
Exactly.
what we are here to do, right? Just designing something with empathy, making sure that everything is useful in the end. With that, I would like to thank you very much for taking time to join our podcast.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you.
Thanks once again. So, guys, this was today's episode for UX Panther podcast. Next week, we'll get back with another design leader from the industry. And till then, have a great day ahead. Bye.